reporting from down under. In the 1990s, when I was in my 30s, the hole in the ozone layer was a big thing here in New Zealand. That was a time when we were all being warned not to go out into the sun without covering oneself with copious quantities of sunscreen. That narrative has died down in recent years until now. One does not hear anything about it, certainly not in the New Zealand media, ostensibly because we have banned the main source of the depletion of the ozone layer, chlorofluorocarbons. Never mind the fact that they are being produced illegally in numerous places, not only in China, but I read something in Italy as well. So just a few years ago, it was announced loudly, as you can see here, that this problem is behind us. Remember the ozone hole? Oh, now here's proof that it's healing. Scientists find evidence that the hole is finally shrinking thanks to the phasing out of harmful chemicals 30 years ago. Yeah, just Google it and that's all you'll get. So we've got this. This is 2013. Ozone hole shrinks to record low. Good news from Antarctica. The hole in the ozone layer is shrinking. New measurements reveal. Ozone is a molecule made up of 3 oxygen atoms. It's relatively highly concentrated in a particular layer of the stratosphere about 12 miles to 19 miles above Earth's surface. This ozone layer prevents ultraviolet light from reaching Earth's surface, a good thing given that UV light causes sunburn and cancer. So the ozone layer, the hole in the ozone layer has healed itself. What if that was not the case at all? And in fact, ozone levels are rising, and they're rising at a dangerous rate. So let's just briefly go into this. Well, this is taking some of the historical data about the ozone levels, the hole in the ozone levels from 1996 through to 2012, and you can see from here that the lowest level of ozone was, well, roughly, I don't know, between 100 and 150 DU. So that was when it was really serious. Now that's the official data. Now the reason I've done this video is because of this. Some of the data for spring in Antarctica is coming out, and it's showing quite low levels of ozone. Now I'll go into some of the official science after this, but spring, August, September is the time when when traditionally the ozone layer starts to thin over Antarctica. So the question really is by how much. So let's just have a look at today, well, just the last few days on Copernicus. So that's starting on the 3rd. Now look at the levels. We said before, did we not, that levels, the lowest levels were about 150. Now look at the lowest levels here. That's already 175 to 200 DU. So, well, unless I'm mistaken, that's really getting down there rather than up there in terms of ozone uh, depletion. So let us just have one more look. So we've got those things. I just want to go back and, compare. So these are the levels that were seen in the 90s. So we're seeing 150 to 200 DU. So what we're seeing in the Antarctic at the moment, at least on the surface to me as a non-expert, seems to be kind of fairly close to what it was before, even though of course it's only covering part of the Antarctic and not the whole area as shown here. Now I just want to go over here to the global view, and you can see kind of the very low levels here in the Antarctica, and then you can see very high levels of ozone in the waters just to the north of Antarctica, and quite high here in New Zealand, which is something to be pleased about. My friend Margot Healing Spot Corner, has been doing an excellent job of monitoring ozone levels and educating people, and she has been showing a lot. It's not showing up in today's data, but to some extent you've got low levels, 240 to 280 in the equatorial areas. And there is concern about that. So let's just have a look at some of the headlines, and this is from just a couple of years ago. When reducing global ozone pollution, place matters most. Greenhouse gases emitted in cities near the equator have the biggest impact on ozone levels worldwide, a new study suggests. And disturbing losses of protective ozone near Earth's equator may be tied to short-lived chemicals. And the ozone is thinning in places around the equator. The planet's natural protection from UV radiation may be in danger over some of the world's most populous areas. The backstory: huge ozone loss hit Earth in the 1980s, especially above Antarctica. The Montreal Protocol banned the chemicals that were responsible for the depletion, and ozone levels in the upper stratosphere grew again. In a paper published in Atmospheric Chemistry and Physics, researchers explain that ozone in the lower stratosphere is now thinning at lower latitudes near the equator, where billions of people live and sunlight is at its most intense. The resulting loss of ultraviolet protection could be a disaster. And they say what's causing it is still unclear. It may be that changes in atmospheric circulation due to global warming are shifting ozone toward the poles, or some industrial chemicals once thought to safely break down in the lower atmosphere may in fact make their way high enough to account for the damage. Well, that sounds like hypothesizing or kind of making it up to me. There's another aspect or another explanation to this, but first of all, I will go into the official stuff about this. Well, let's just have a look at what Wikipedia, the font of all human knowledge, has to say about this in their article on ozone depletion. They say it consists of two related events observed since the late 1970s, a steady lowering of about 4% in the total amount of ozone in the Earth's atmosphere, and a much larger springtime decrease in stratospheric ozone around Earth's polar regions. The latter phenomenon is referred to as the ozone hole. There are also springtime polar tropospheric ozone depletion events in addition to these stratospheric events. It goes into the causes later. The ozone hole and its causes, and the levels of recent ozone levels have dropped as low as 33% of their pre-1975 values. The ozone hole occurs during the Antarctic spring from September, in other words from now, to early December, as strong westerly winds start to circulate around the continent and create an atmospheric container. Within this polar vortex, over 50% of the lower stratospheric ozone is destroyed during the Antarctic spring. So I won't go into all of this. I'll leave a link to this Wikipedia article in the description box. And what they're saying are prospects of ozone depletion. Since the adoption and strengthening of the Montreal Protocol has led to reductions in the emissions of CFCs, atmospheric concentrations of the most significant compounds have been declining. So this is supposed to be current. These substances are being gradually removed from the atmosphere since peaking in 1984, and the effective equivalent chlorine level in the atmosphere has dropped about 10% by 2008. The decrease in ozone depleting chemicals has also been significantly affected by the decrease in bromine containing chemicals. The data suggested the substantial natural sources exist for atmospheric methyl bromide. This phase out of CFCs means that nitrous oxide, which is not covered in the Montreal Protocol, has become the most highly emitted ozone depleting substance and is expected to remain so through the 21st century. A 2005 IPCC review of ozone observations and model calculations concluded that the global amount of ozone has now approximately stabilized, although considerable variability is expected from year to year, including in polar regions where depletion is largest. The ozone layer is expected to begin to recover in coming decades due to declining ozone depleting substance concentrations, assuming full compliance with the Montreal Protocol. However, it is expected to continue for several decades. And ozone concentrations in the lower stratosphere of Antarctica will increase by 5 to 10% by 2020 and return to pre-1980 levels by about 2060 and 2075. This is 10 to 25 years later than predicted in earlier assessments because of revised estimates of atmospheric concentrations of ozone depleting substances, including a wider predicted future usage in developing countries. Another factor which may prolong ozone depletion is the drawdown of nitrogen oxides from the stratosphere due to changing wind patterns. A gradual trend towards healing was reported in 2016. And there's one more section, what they say about ozone depletion and global warming. And basically what they're saying, the same CO2 radiative forcing that produces global warming is expected to cool the stratosphere. This cooling, in turn, is expected to produce a relative increase in ozone depletion in polar area and the frequency of ozone holes. Conversely, ozone depletion represents a radiative forcing of the climate system. There are two opposing effects. Reduced ozone causes the stratosphere to absorb less solar radiation, thus cooling the stratosphere while warming the troposphere. The resulting colder stratosphere emits less long-wave radiation downward, thus cooling the troposphere. Overall, the cooling dominates. The IPC concludes observed stratospheric ozone losses over the past decades have caused a negative forcing of the surface troposphere system of about 0.15 to plus or minus 0.10 watts per square meter. Yeah, and so forth. Here we have a dissident view from Dane Wigington of Geoengineering Watch. As I understand it, a lot of the motivation for his activism over the past 20 years has been that he was only getting a fraction of the output he was getting before from his solar panels. So there was a major fall off in sunlight. At the same time, he has noticed that the radiative energy from the sun has increased, and I think a lot of people notice this, that the sun actually feels hotter. So when you put your arm outside the window of the car, it feels hot really, really quickly, whereas the ambient temperature might only be a fraction of that. At the same time, he was noticing that there were signs of die-off of trees in California and leaf burn and the like, and insects are dying off all around the planet, plankton is dying, etc. So none of the traditional explanations satisfied him, so he got an expert who worked for NASA to measure levels of radiation, and what he found there was a huge increase in UVB radiation levels. It's UVA that is usually seen as the main culprit, and it's the wavelength that causes sunburn. But he also talks about a huge increase in levels of UVC radiation. Now that's something that conventional science tells us does not reach the surface of the planet, and therefore is not relevant to the conversation. So all of this is sort of quite new to me. So I will just go through the article here. And he says, how bad can it get? Just when it seemed the negative news surrounding global geoengineering could not get any worse, it absolutely can and is. This article is from 2014 and he's done more since. So he says that we've known for some time that UV levels were getting rapidly worse due to the ongoing atmospheric spraying. Anyone that is slightly awake and aware has noticed that the sun feels incredibly intense on the skin. Most varieties of plant life are showing at least some signs of stress in most areas. In many regions, whole forests are in steep decline. So of course there are other explanations for this, and it's natural that there should be more than one explanation. So now he's claiming that although extreme drought and toxic rains, and due large part to heavy metal fallout from geoengineering, are taking their toll, recent metering of UV levels in Northern California increase indicate that there is an element in this die-off that's far worse than we had realized, an incomprehensibly high level of UV radiation. So as I said before, he got the help of someone to set up a metering system, and he said the results are beyond shocking. So we're told that UVB is only a minor component of the total solar radiation. We now know that this could not be further from the truth. Our metering reflects an exponential rise in UVB radiation. Due to its high energy, its potential for causing biological damage to plants, animals, and humans is exceptionally high, and even small increases could lead to significant biological damage. There are numerous peer-reviewed studies which verify this fact. So, the World Health Organization says there should be no more than 5% of the total UV reaching the surface of the Earth should be UVB. The other 95% should be UVA. That's the one that causes skin cancer. The agencies go on to state that UVC should be 0. So their testing has shown that UVB, the most lethal form of radiation, has now escalated to almost 70% of the total UV reaching the surface of our planet. At least that's true where they're measuring in the United States. In addition, the testing has shown significant levels of UVC, which used to be filtered out by the ozone layer some 1,000 feet up in our atmosphere, but he says not anymore. And he points out that the lower the bandwidth of the radiation, the more lethal it is. So UVB and UVC is much lower, has a much lower bandwidth, or yeah, anyway. So he's translated that into, as there has been a 1,400% increase in UVB as a percentage of total UV. If UVA has also gone up due to the same ozone destruction which is driven up by UVB, this would indicate a likelihood that total UVB and UVC is still higher still, not just a difference of ratio with the same overall number. So he goes into the effects of it. I mean, the effects of the UV radiation is huge. And he goes into the forests and the phytoplankton, and it's killing off the plankton. The less plankton we have, the less carbon dioxide absorption we have. And its effect on coral reefs, and also it has known effects on UV, not just cancer. Okay, so I'm not going to go into all of the details here. He's saying that the geoengineering aerosols destroy the ozone layer, but also that oxygen, which is drawn into the other atmosphere, is not making it, so there's nothing there turning it back into O3 or ozone. So there's a lot of things here, which I won't go into, so I'll just provide the link to this article. And there was an interesting interview with his off-sider, the ex-NASA engineer, about all of this, and that is really well worthwhile listening to, and I will include that in the description. So, well, anyway, there we are. Interesting. This comes from Tom Hartman, who I see has discontinued all his forums, and I don't think you'd find him talking about this. This was 2012. I don't think you'd find him talking about this in 2019. In fact, I'm bloody sure I wouldn't. Anyway, it's entitled, Professor, Geoengineering Climate Change Solution Would Destroy the Ozone Layer and Kill People. Dr. Caroli of the University of Melbourne School of Earth Science says another pie in the sky solution is to shoot sulfur particles in the atmosphere to shield the Earth from the sun. I mean, this is very, very kind of right to the, this is what they're saying now. He said that it would destroy the ozone layer. Now, let's just have a quick look. So he's given some articles to follow up, and it's really, really interesting. No, nothing there. Ha! And he's given another article too about this. Ah, what do you know? Is this self-censorship? So it goes on. Has anyone stepped out into the sun lately? Others have affirmed what I have experienced. That's Tom Hartman, I believe. It is a lot easier to get a sunburn than it used to be. Has anyone else noticed? They are illegally geoengineering the atmosphere of our planet. This is Tom Hartman, with a lot worse than sulfur particles, and now they want to do more. The need for geoengineering. Do the lovely graphs convince you? There are lunatics calling themselves scientists, preparing the stage for disaster in the name of science. They will lead us to our deaths by trying to play God and manipulating systems that were not meant to be manipulated by man. They are transhumanists, Google it, who believe that the technology will surpass human being. We will be truly subservient to machine in all its glory. These people are insane. Well, that was back then, and yeah, it hasn't gone away. They've been chemtrailing the planet heavily for more than a decade now, not to mention the sacrilegious cooking of the ionosphere, i.e. HAARP. No, that was actually not from Tom Hartman. This was actually posted by somebody else, but nevertheless. As a final postscript to all of this, I'm going to go back to CFCs. This was an article that really kind of struck me about 2 years ago from the BBC, and I've never seen anything about it. It's never been repeated anywhere else. But it says dodgy greenhouse gas data threatens Paris Accord. And it says potent climate warming gases are being emitted into the atmosphere but are not being recorded in official inventories, a BBC investigation has found. Air monitors in Switzerland have declared large quantities of one gas coming from a location in Italy. However, the Italian submission to the UN records just a tiny amount of the gas is being emitted. Levels of some emissions from India and China are so uncertain that experts say that their records are plus or minus 100%. So it's saying, and this is coming from the BBC, these flaws pose a bigger threat to the Paris Climate Agreement than US President Donald Trump's intention to withdraw. So this is Swiss scientists published their data on levels of a gas called HFC-23 coming from a location in northern Italy. Between 2008 and 2010, they recorded samples of the chemical produced in the refrigeration and air conditioning industries. That's what produces the CFCs, which is 14,800 times more warming to the atmosphere than CO2. And the gas is still going into the atmosphere. And then another rare warming gas, carbon tetrachloride, once popular as a refrigerant and a solvent, but very damaging to the ozone layer, has been banned in Europe since 2002. We still see 10,000 to 20,000 tons coming from out of China every year. So, yeah, there's a load of, we're being fed a load of bullshit, really. This is the truth that well, hardly anyone is going to tell you, and when it comes out, it just disappears without a trace. Back to these observations, and usually what I try to do is I just try to interpret what I see. I'm not based on ideology. I'm not saying that anything that I've posted up here is true. It's just an explanation, an attempt to explain what I see, why we get this now, and how do I compare it with this data, which seems, at least to my untrained eye, to show that we have, at least in parts of Antarctica, even if not the whole, because these are only figures for a short length of time, they're not mean temperature measurements. So why the UV levels in Antarctica seem to be so low, and so I just explore different ideas, and I've gone far enough down this rabbit hole not to ever accept just what I'm being told, because there are so many reasons to indicate that that is not the full story. Anyway, that's enough from me. This is Seymour Rocks reporting from down under.